Hi, folks. Welcome to Tuesday's edition of the I Write Radio podcast. We've got Jimmy Hutton with us from the start. Will he make it to the end? Stuart Lockhead,
Hello
as
there.
per usual. I'm Norrie Stewart. Well, today excuse me. Today we'll cover Holyrood, the announcement of the various levels and who's in and who's out. We're going to have a chat about Michael Gove's appearance in front of the European Committee, again at Holyrood, and two pieces in the papers today, one by Colin Scott, famous for his love of the Wellington horse, and Michael Fry, one's on the kind of left of the indie movement and Michael Fry's kind of on the right of the indie movement. But let's kick off with Nicholas Sturgeon's levels. Jimmy, do you want to pop at this?
Not particularly, mate. It's nothing that we weren't expecting, is it? Although I'd just say again, I feel for people who are trying to run a business who were told that'll be 69 days ago that they would close for 16 days and they've been shut for 69. So,
well,
that's fair. But certainly it would appear that the trend has been of the COVID, of the pandemic in Scotland, has been on the up. And you could say that the First Minister was justified by being cautious.
yeah, but the smugness that she displayed was quite upsetting to some, I'd imagine.
I'm sorry, Jimmy. I do think she had every right to say, we made a decision because the numbers were going up and gosh, we were right. There's a lot of people criticised that decision whose mouths have been shut.
I didn't think they have been shut, mate. My criticism of that decision is how the sovereign people of Scotland are being, how the representatives of Scotland are perfectly happy to use sovereign power to rule over the sovereign will of the people. You know, she's using powers that she shouldn't be using, and she's using them gladly.
So, well, what interests me about, your position that you've got, you do have an iron in this fire, but she's always said she was going to err on the side of caution. She made a decision about Tier 3 for Edinburgh that turned out to be, I believe, the correct decision.
You say it's correct. I still say, why did she bother setting levels if she's going to completely disregard them?
Well, the point is, she isn't disregarding them.
She is disregarding them.
The people that believe
near the figure where we should be in level 3.
And every time she stands up and says it's not an algorithm, it's a judgment, everybody who thinks she's wrong says it should be an algorithm. And everybody who thinks she's right said, good judgment.
Well, to some extent, I'm with, on the one, I can see Jimmy's point of view, because the large majority of the population of Scotland could easily have been in, you could have had just two levels. One would be a lockdown and the other would be the islands and the fringes, because we're almost got to that point, haven't we?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, for weeks, I've been a second-class citizen in my own country because she's using powers that I don't think she's entitled to hold, and never mind use, to restrict my liberties. And she's not restricting the liberties of the whole country. She's restricting the liberties of the parts of the country
that's a point of principle. You're perfectly entitled to hold, Jimmy. But given that we are in a pandemic and people are dying, at the end of the day, the argument is between deaths and what?
Democracy.
Aye, and as I say, I think I do remember back when Westminster took the emergency powers to themselves, the SNP were somewhat outraged. They're very, very happy now to use those emergency powers, and the outrage has disappeared a long, long time ago.
I think they were outraged at, well, remember the powers they attempted to take themselves about Brexit. That was where the SNP outrage was. I don't think there was much outrage about the powers to deal with the pandemic.
The principle's the same. They're operating under the royal prerogative. I'm not sure that the Scottish Parliament has any right. I don't think there's anything in the Scotland Act of 98 or 2016.
Well, they've got a democratic right because it was voted for by Parliament to give them those powers. That's where they stem from.
But
They didn't just take them.
no, they were handed them by Westminster as a sop because Westminster
no, Jimmy,
far more power.
it was voted for in Holyrood.
I don't think they have the. I don't think they have the cognizance to do that.
Yeah,
They're
but
using royal prerogative powers to restrict the liberties to the people.
Okay, yeah, Jimmy, under the UK Constitution, you could well be right. There could be royal prerogative powers, but there won't be a nation state in the world that doesn't have the ability to call emergency powers in the face of an emergency. Come on, this pandemic is an emergency.
Well, wait a minute. Take that to its logical conclusion, Jimmy. If the Scottish Government don't have the powers, that means the Westminster Government would have the powers to tell the Scottish Government to enact what the Westminster Government wanted, because the Westminster Government do have the powers.
Well, they kind of do anyway, Norrie, don't they? Because they've told them that we're having a 5-day relaxation at Christmas and Nicola rolled over.
Well, I thought about that Greenwich Council one in London. In fact, 3 London councils decided that things were that bad there, they were going to shut the schools early. Now, they've definitely used Gavin Williamson, the worst government minister, we all agree on that, has used the real emergency powers to cancel that.
Aye.
Well, you're referring to the level playing fields of Eton.
No, this is just local schools in London, and
I know, but that's the point I'm making here. Is it only applies to local schools in London. It doesn't apply to.
It doesn't apply to academy schools even, which is another thing that most of the people in Scotland don't know anything about.
Sorry, guys, give me a minute.
Yeah. Well, you and I can argue about this, Jimmy, for sure.
I think Gavin Williamson may have overstepped the mark last night, but again, I very much doubt that, given that it's only a matter of days, the schools are going to shut for Christmas holidays anyway in a few days, so I don't think there'll be any legal challenge because, again, like the judge did last week at the Court of Session, it would just be batted back to the politicians.
I don't think we're, to be honest, we're waiting just for a meeting, it's probably going on now, between the 4 nations and Michael Gove, and maybe even Boris sat there picking his nose. Mm-hmm. Things could change radically between now and 7 o'clock because they may decide to cancel the Christmas break. But
I don't think any of them want to be the Grinch that cancels Christmas. But
no, they don't.
They don't. That one of them has to.
But did you see what I caught up that they're actually subsidising coach companies so that people can go home at Christmas in England?
That's astonishing behaviour, isn't it?
Bonkers.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, but this is an unsolvable one. People are going to do what they're going to do, depending on their personalities.
Yeah, but why subsidise it?
Because they got to show that they're being nice to students.
Presumably because some Tories or Tory donors have massive shares in bus companies.
I would have thought that's more likely.
Well, I mean, this is politics. Nobody in their right mind would allow a normal Christmas. I'm sorry. I mean, if you're above 5, your R rate's above 5, you shouldn't have.
Well, Germany's cancelled Christmas. Czech Republic's cancelled Christmas.
This is politics.
They are going to allow a normal Christmas, because they're not going to turn around and tell people who have made plans to travel that they shall not now travel. What they'll do, if they do anything tonight, they'll say, those of you who haven't made plans, don't move. And the reality is, given how high the numbers are in certain parts of Wales and the southeast of England, there should be a national lockdown.
I wouldn't be surprised if Wales went for it.
There's bits of Wales 7 times the rate in Edinburgh. 7 times the infection rate in Edinburgh. 700 to the 100,000, for crying out loud.
What I find most amusing about this whole thing is, if the Westminster government had the bottle to just turn around and say, right, we're taking charge of this, and locked us down until we were all below 5 or whatever, it would have been so much simpler.
Yeah,
it would have been screaming from the devolved nations, obviously.
Aye, but when you look at the places that did have been successful and have either eradicated it or have numbers that low that it's effectively non-existent within their country. That's what they done. It was massive lockdown, huge lockdown. I mean, it worked. The second burst that they had in Victoria or Australia, all right, there were some draconian measures introduced, but by Christ, it worked.
The kind of the point I was coming on to, that would only have been possible without the devolved nations being involved, because none of the devolved nations would have been allowed to close their borders. So Scotland couldn't have locked down independent of everybody else. Anymore could Northern Ireland, which really Northern Ireland was the lucky ones, because Southern Ireland basically locked down. And that's why their problems didn't start till they started opening up again.
Do you know, we're now approaching not the politics, but the real possible disaster that is facing all of us. If something like February, we now know what an overwhelmed NHS will be like. It's not just the COVID people that are dying. It's not just the old people there that are dying. It's the thousands that will die because the hospitals won't be able to cope with ordinary people getting ill and injured.
This is the point at which the hypocrisy will kick in again, because everybody that was screaming to stop the bed blocking, who is now screaming about the damage done in care homes, will start screaming again about bed blocking. They were all warned that, you know, cancer patients, people who needed hip replacements, etc., would suffer. And a decision was taken to put COVID at the top of the tree.
It's interesting that nobody, and by nobody I mean none of the media, have actually done any work or even any segments, I've not seen any, on the stated readiness of the NHS in the UK. They talk about whether or not it's going to cope, but you know, we didn't know if we're it. I think certain places in London, Wales, they're kind of about 90% capacity, occupation right now. We don't know what Scotland's like because nobody's telling.
There were hospitals, I think there was 2 of them had to close their doors not so long ago in England. So, you know, I mean, and I don't think, unless it's touched you personally, you know, within your family or quite close to you, I don't think people really grasp, because I mean, you don't get ill and have to be off work for a fortnight. You know, you kind of, it's different from flu in that sense. Everybody doesn't know what it is unless it's touched you closely.
I mean, the cancer patients is a clear, easy one to understand. The cancer patients that didn't have their scans, that their tumors weren't discovered, their tumors grew and became terminal. Their cases became terminal because they didn't get the treatment that they would normally have gotten. That is typical. I mean, I'm worried about certain people.
And impossible to evaluate.
It's impossible to evaluate, and yet at the same time, it's been personal in my life.
Yeah, but we'll get no data on that because any excess death will just be
but it'll make people like me. I got angry. Other people will get angry about it.
But your anger will achieve nothing, mate, because they'll just say, no, it was COVID. It was COVID what caused it. So the number, we'll never know the excess deaths through cancer, through other things, because they'll just all be rolled up in excess death.
I don't think it'll be as simple as that, Jimmy. I personally won't let it rest.
I think it'll be, there will be estimates made. Nobody's going to come up with a hard figure because you don't know. You don't know if your granny's cancerous growth didn't just explode 2 weeks before it was found. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but if it's a young person that's died and it appears to be unnecessary, you're going to get angry.
Well, I think that's the point I'm making. Depending on what side of the fence you're on with any given government, you will decide it's their fault. There won't be any finessing of this. The unionist press will blame the Scottish Government. The unionist press down south, the Tory press, will simply not mention it. You know, I mean, it's going to be a stick that will be selectively used to beat whichever government you hate, and ignored if it's a government of your colour. and it was ever thus.
And well,
Mr. Gove.
so
All right. He's comes across as frighteningly competent compared to Boris when you see him. He was on the TV or on the screens doing a virtual committee meeting with MSPs from Holyrood this afternoon, and he's possibly still talking now, but I doubt it. And he does, at least he comes across as a competent man. We just know that he's a devious bastard.
He, I like the way he chose to totally ignore the question about tariffs between Ireland, Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland. He switched the question to a question of tariffs between Scotland going into Northern Ireland and then on to the EU. And of course they would have tariffs.
Yeah, I thought Struan Stevenson's question seemed quite straightforward at first, but it kind of got nowhere because Gove batted it off to his expert.
Well, Gove knew what the question was, which is why he didn't answer it. And the question was, does Northern Ireland have tariffs between it and the EU? The answer is no. Anything produced in Northern Ireland goes to the EU tariff-free. However, anything produced in Scotland will have tariffs into the EU. There is no level playing field.
But Struan Stevenson then asks, what if my Scottish company, no, not my Scottish company, but the theoretical Scottish company then sends a product to Northern Ireland where it gets a bit of processing, it can then go into the EU.
Well, it'll depend because there'll be different rules for different things, I would imagine. But what they were, both him and Christine Graham were trying to establish was the fact that Northern Ireland would have a competitive advantage over the other three nations.
Well, it would appear that these horrible, I say horrible, that's not fair, that's the wrong thing to say. These fishing families in the northeast of Scotland that seem to own all the quota in their big ships, apparently they'll be moving their ships to Northern Ireland.
Yeah, of course they will. It will decimate the Scottish fleet.
There won't be any fish landed in Scotland. They'll all get landed in Northern Ireland.
Well, do they need to do that? Do they need to go that far? Surely they can just register their boats in Belfast and land their fish in Scotland.
I don't know.
The paperwork could go from Belfast to whatever, wouldn't it?
No, I think they actually have to land it in Northern Ireland.
Which means all the jobs in the northeast of Scotland will go.
Actually,
they're just not going to do, because I'm sorry, but they're not going to pay any advantage that they made when on tariffs would be absolutely wiped out by fuel costs.
They're catching most of the fish, according to what did either you see the fake fishing boats map?
I saw that. It was a load of shite.
It was a load of shite. But it is true that most of the fish is caught to the west of the British Isles. There's not a lot left in the North Sea.
That's not accurate at all, mate. Peterhead's no. The biggest landings go to Peterhead, so they're not catching it west and then sailing into the north of Scotland to take it. No, mate. They're no landing in Peterhead. They're no sailing round the north of Scotland to land in Peterhead for no reason.
Well, that's because the market's there, isn't it? But anyway, let's not argue about that. But there's certainly an awful lot of fish is landed on the west. They're, Killybegs in Ireland, etc. However,
none
of us are experts in fishing, so let's not get too worked up about that.
There was a trick missed when Gove used the politician's trick of listing all the benefits Scotland gets from Westminster. So the question was still on this Northern Ireland tariff advantage. And Gove, I can't remember, I think it was Christine. So he listed everything, the money we give you, all the wonderful free trade deals, all these advantages that Scotland had. She should have turned around and said, which of them are you taking off Ireland because they've got a tariff advantage? She didn't, because I would have loved to see his answer to that one. I would like to congratulate the Tory members of the committee who only asked questions that were criticising the Scottish Government.
Yeah, well, that's the way it works.
Well, you kind of think committee's not supposed to be about that, is it?
It's the way it works. Why, my question is, well, I immediately think about the Scottish questions at Westminster, questions to the Secretary of State for Scotland. I don't understand why the SNP bother turning up at all. Because it's just used as an excuse to batter the Scottish Government. And if the SNP aren't there, then it's a demonstration of just what it really is.
No, it's still,
but if
it
the
can
SNP
still be
aren't there,
used.
then they can say what they want and they'll never be held.
Well, that's what they do anyway. It's really cringingly awful.
It can still be used for sound bites on the evening news.
Talking of which, I take it none of us will be watching the evening news tonight because we'll have this whole horror about the drug death figure.
We need somebody to break down those figures between illegal drug use and, I don't know.
I think we need a brave Scottish Government. There are some topics which I really don't support them on. For example, the drugs issue. It's forever being batted off. It's a UK government responsibility. We can't do anything about it at all. And yet, I mean, you hear that it's actually down to the Lord Advocate here in Scotland. And
no, drugs policy is devolved.
Oh, I know that it is, but if the Scottish Government were not to prosecute, or simply not, let's say that guy with the van that's providing a safe fixing.
The Scottish Government can't instruct a prosecution decision from the Crown Office. They can't order them to do that.
The Lord Advocate must be able to do that, then, is he?
The Lord Advocate is a law officer, mate. He's not employed as an employee of the Scottish Government.
He's a minister of the Scottish Government.
Our government cannot wade in there and say, right, stop charging people. They just can't do that. It's Home Office policy that dictates whether people are charged or not.
Well, let's put it this way. All across different police forces in England, they seem to have chief constables that operate different drugs policies, don't they?
Yeah, but what you're talking about here is you're talking about amounts of drugs and stuff, personal use.
Well, deciding whether to use their police budget to go after drugs issues, whether to bother or not. Durham didn't bother. North Wales didn't bother. You know,
that's a police issue
in Scotland.
The chief constable, I dare say, could make that decision to issue a warning rather than arrest someone. But the government, again, can't tell the chief constable to do that.
And I mean, another issue, which is completely different, but the GERS one, you know, I am 90% convinced that the GERS is a complete lie and a waste of time, and yet the SNP government still allows the civil servants to produce it and then don't rubbish it.
That's because they do not have access. They go on about it being Scottish Government figures. It's Scottish Government figures based on Westminster Treasury figures.
Well, there's another issue.
They do not get access to the raw data.
There's another issue that's always grey, and nobody seems to be who's in any position of power in Scotland in the government. It's come up with a salmon conspiracy-ish. You know, when they say it was the Scottish Government that did something, everybody assumes it was the SNP that did it, but maybe it was the civil servants.
Well, the civil servants shouldn't do anything unless they've been instructed by ministers.
In theory, but we suspect that is not the case in Scotland.
Well, they shouldn't be doing anything without the green flag from Scottish ministers.
Well, in that case, this SNP government is to blame for some things that we don't.
The SNP government are certainly to blame for something. The SNP government will whinge about these drug deaths today, but the SNP government are the ones that shut down the rehab beds. That was a decision taken by the SNP for the best intentions, really, because they thought the rehab wasn't working, and they thought that
it's very expensive.
Well, that, and also leaving people sitting for years on methadone wasn't working out. You know, these people that have been on methadone for years they're killing themselves at just the same rate that people that are on smack are killing themselves. So it wasn't making any difference. So they've tinkered about with this. But the reality is they don't have the freedom to completely treat it in the ways that they want to, which is to follow the Portuguese route. That worked in Portugal. There's some interesting studies that have worked in places like Holland and Canada. They want to do different things and they can't do it because the Home Office won't allow them to do that.
I wonder, I mean, I have to admit, I'm a bit amazed they haven't come up with some scheme where basically they build a GP surgery that is in reality a clean drug use facility where they've got the help there on tap, and you just get an appointment when you walk in the door and you shoot up during your appointment under medical supervision. You know, I mean, can they not finesse things to make them legal?
I mean,
To be
last
honest,
night,
Norrie, I didn't think the will's there.
last night's ITV news, which was very late, it was about 11:15 last night instead of 10 o'clock. And it had a huge piece about Scotland, and it was all SNP bad. And they had that fellow with a van in Glasgow. And that seems, when he first launched that, which the idea that a private individual has to risk breaking the law to rescue people, it seems awful, doesn't it? But I mean, and yet there he was, obviously, is a very current piece of film this week that that they used. And there they were showing film of the guy shooting up in the van. The guy got out of the van, well, they did it, which seemed reasonable enough. But what he had in the van was resus stuff in case somebody overdosed. But that's not the only situation, is it?
Again, no, but it makes a lovely story for the press, and they're kind of going to town on this guy. But again, he's tinkering around the edges.
Yeah.
I'm actually broadcasting. I'm broadcasting.
He's doing it live.
Mm-hmm. Aye, Stuart, that boy's tinkering around the edges now. I mean, he's in certain parts of Glasgow, but there's major, as we know, there's major
Well, he doesn't look
areas in all our cities.
Unlike a lot of charities, Jimmy, he didn't look like he's doing it for his ego.
I
think he's genuine.
I think he's genuine as well, mate. I think he's lost somebody at some point, and he just feels that this can make. If he saves one person, he's doing something right.
Aye, make a difference.
It's interesting what a big thing it is. I mean, does it get anything like the press inches when these figures come out in other countries?
No, this is a wonderful thing to beat the Scots with, particularly given that England and Wales gerrymander their figures, so we are so much worse than them at it. You know what I mean?
That was something I was going to say earlier. It's something I'd like to see, is the actual breakdown. You know, how much of it is due to illegal drug use? How much is
Tusk has done a few things. I think that's me away, guys. I'll speak to you later.
Cool.
Okay, not a problem.
Well, that leaves us with...
Well, it leaves us with left versus right, independistas, Norrie.
So, well, do you want to give us a...
There's not much to say, but it struck me when Jimmy flagged up a little piece in the Daily Record by Colin Fox. Now, Colin Fox has been leader of the main left-wing socialist party in Scotland. It is the main one, isn't it? The SSP. Yeah. Colin has been leading that party since Tommy Sheridan was shocked. Shocked the nation, shall we say.
I mean, his main thrust is, well, he's jumping on the anti-Nicola bandwagon, isn't he, really? That we should be wary that the numbers for independence are really some sort of cult following Nicola.
Yeah, let's see what he says. I got and lost it. Oh, dear. Independence veteran was the headline. To start with, I think I'd like to point out that I saw what was the head. It was flagged up to me in Facebook, so I had a look at that. It then said it was linked to the Daily Record. So I went to the Daily Record, and then as soon as I got there, I realised why I never read the Daily Record. It's not a question of principle. It's not because I can't stand what they do publish, because I actually don't know what they publish, because they have such an awful website that I can't ever read anything on it, because it's like going to an old-fashioned porn site where everything piles onto your screen and you're not in control of it.
Never been to a porn site, mate.
The one used to get, if you clicked just on the wrong button on it, this is 20 years ago, on a perfectly innocent website, you could get diverted to one of these websites, and suddenly there would be a rolling rush of ads all over your screen, because whoever owned the website was making a fortune from every ad that was flashed up on your face. It's almost as bad as that. I never read anything on the Daily Record. However, that aside, they managed to get a quote from Colin. I like Colin, nice enough guy, and but it's flagged up as Nicolamania. Independence veteran warns poll lead is based on Nicolamania and compares First Minister to Tony Blair. I don't understand the Tony Blair angle. Can you tell me, Norrie, what does that mean?
Well, Tony Blair was very popular to begin with, as was Donald Trump and Boris Johnson. So I'm not very pleased with him. Basically, he avoided those two right enough. But his point is valid, and it's one of the things I keep harping on about. Why cut a very popular head off the SNP snake when she's worth maybe 2, 3, 4 points in any election would the SNP go into?
Well, that is, of course, the question. Just what is it? Now, this is in proper quotes that I've got here, so presumably Colin said it. Nicolamania will inevitably come to an end, just as Corbyn mania did. That's true. They were singing Corbyn at Glastonbury, weren't they? The popularity of one politician is not a strong enough foundation for the independence struggle. Well, I would say the independence struggle will continue, but right now it does depend on Nicola.
I don't totally disagree with him. I think he's making too much of it. And frankly, because it's a leader on my side of the argument that's making it so popular, what's he suggesting? That we get rid of Nicola so we can find out how unpopular independence is.
But I like Jimmy's quote, Jimmy's comment about it. And it points it out. Sturgeon's personal popularity. She's had a part. This is Colin Fox saying, Sturgeon's personal popularity is because she's had a party election broadcast every day for half an hour. Now that is what, of course, the Tories have been saying,
and the Labour Party,
and the Labour Party. But you know, you just don't need these people to be throwing brickbats at the SNP about independence if you've got the left, the Scottish Socialist Party, saying the same thing. But you know, yeah, maybe they're right.
I wonder if Colin believes if he had the same access to TV, he would be as popular as Nicola. It's not about access to TV. It's about the personality, the way she comes across.
Yeah.
And she was hugely popular before COVID. And considering some of the decisions she's had to make have pissed off a lot of people, it's amazing she's remained popular. You seem to be ignoring that.
I can't finish this point without actually one final quote from, in an interview with the Daily Record, he also likened the ill-advised euphoria, this is all about Nicola Sturgeon, to and the fact that there's been a lot of polls, of course, they've been fairly solid lately, but he likened the ill-advised euphoria to the mood ahead of Scotland's World Cup disaster in Argentina in 1978. That's the last thing you want to be reminded of, I think.
Well, I didn't find too much in the way of depth in it. I mean, Colin was a solid worker, did a lot of good work in 2014. Did we never interview him? No.
Oh yeah, I've interviewed him a few times. It's been a long time. Maybe it's time.
And we've certainly spoken to him a few times. And I've got a lot of respect for him. Stuck to his guns. Even when he became an MSP, he was the same Colin when he got thrown out. So,
Well,
you know, I respect the man, but I don't quite see his argument that you shouldn't take full advantage of the popularity of a leader when it's there.
Well, I felt I wanted to bring his little piece up because Michael Fry has also got a piece making the headlines today. Michael Fry, you could say, is from the right. He's a right-wing independista, and Colin Fox is a left-wing independista. So it seemed reasonable to compare and contrast. Now, it's not possible to do that properly because the topics are completely different. However, it just struck me there. It might be interesting to get both of them into a three-way or a four-way conversation and record it for the show, but that's another story. Michael Fry's usually got a weekly comment article in the National, hasn't he?
Yeah.
So this time he's brought up, there's nothing federal about the UK and it's too late to start now. So he repeats what we've all said. Gordon Brown has come back up and flagged it up, but he's brought up Sir Malcolm Rifkin. And I didn't know Sir Malcolm Rifkin was a devolutionist, because this is what surprised me. And here's a quote from Michael Fry. He says, and he must have known, after all, Michael Fry probably was a Tory before it was fashionable to be an independista. He says here, Rifkin, former Scottish Secretary and Foreign Secretary, you know, he's a
big hitter, yeah.
Yeah, big hitter. He was at the outset of his parliamentary career quite a keen devolutionist. He gave up this youthful folly so as to stake his claim to a seat in Margaret Thatcher's cabinet. So there, I didn't know that.
See, Rifkin was a One Nation Tory.
Yes,
and
I met him a couple of times.
There was a number of One Nation Tories that thought devolution would be good for the Tory party in Scotland. It would allow them to differentiate. People forget that. People forget that there were Tories who thought it would help their position in Scotland.
Well, Murdo Fraser wanted a devolved Tory party in Scotland.
Yeah, and it's if you look at what Douglas Ross is saying at the moment, it doesn't sound anything like what's coming out of Number 10, although he still votes.
Yeah, but
with Westminster Tories.
Yeah, but I have to remind the listeners and viewers that anything a Tory says is simply because they're trained to lie.
Well, I won't go so far as to say they're trained to lie. Some of them are very, very bad at it.
Oh, well, some of them are badly trained to lie then.
But I mean, if you look at the way that Douglas Ross is acting, free school meals, for instance, a teacher for every 2 pupils, etc., etc. You know, I mean, he's basically, he looks like a liberal and a very left-wing liberal when he starts this nonsense, and then goes down to Westminster and votes against what he wants for Scotland.
But why? I mean, they could afford to even vote against the government down there and make their case.
But he's looking for the seat next to Baroness Davidson.
Yeah, probably. Well, here's another interesting quote from Michael Fry. The first starting point, according to Rifkin, or according to Fry's version of Rifkin, the first starting point is that nobody wants to live in a UK with a central government as dominated as the present one is by English interests. Well, I'm sorry, I don't agree with that. Do you agree with that, Norrie?
Well, I wouldn't say nobody, but I don't think there are many people in Scotland.
Not many people in Scotland. And the second starting point is that, on the other hand, few of the existing citizens in the Union's 4 nations wanted to be taken apart so decisively that they become almost aliens to one another, as if they belong to the Irish Republic. Don't agree with that. I have never seen a problem with the citizens of the citizens of the Irish Republic in Great Britain. They are treated exactly as if they're British.
Yeah, and they've got rights.
And they've got rights to be here as well.
I mean, they've got freedom of movement and always have had. I'm sure they've got voting rights as well.
Yeah, I mean,
know.
I started moves. I was speaking to a firm of solicitors in Dublin the other week about getting Irish citizenship for myself because I've got great grannies and things and they're Irish. I just don't agree with them. But you do have the elephant in the room. It wouldn't matter. His basic argument is the elephant in the bed. It doesn't matter what you come up with in the way of devolution. England's just so big. They don't want it broken up. England is 55 million people out of 65. So what's...
Well, why would England want to lose?
That's his argument.
Their colonies. You know. And I feel sorry for the Welsh because when the Irish and the Scots go, and once the Welsh go, it'll be the Northerners, won't it?
And it won't work for Wales, I don't think. North Wales in particular is... Did you know when it shocked me when I first went to North Wales, they all speak to me as not a Welshman. They all sounded as though they came from Liverpool. They do have accents like Liverpool.
Very close, yeah.
It's very close. One quote here, he says, no federation in the entire world works with such an extreme disproportion at its core. England would continue to overbear the rest, making the whole exercise rather pointless. Somebody should tell Gordon Brown.
Well, I mean, Gordon Brown doesn't believe in federalism. Gordon Brown believes in wasting time talking about it. All these plans are all ways to stretch out the nationals' patience. What they want is to prevaricate until it's hopefully forgotten.
Well, I'm not going to argue against that one either.
That's all this is. It's got nothing to do with wanting federalism. You know, I mean, can you imagine how long it would take for England to decide how to break up England into federal areas? Your grandchildren would be getting greybeards. And they'd still be talking about it because Yorkshire would be too big and rich compared to Cornwall.
Yeah, and my grandchildren would still be English. So there you go.
And you can bet your bottom dollar they'd find a way to break up Scotland. Scotland will be too big as an entity. So they'll quarter it.
Well, look, we do know traditionally there was the Gaeltacht and the Scots speaking, and then you had the English speaking. But
the politics of it are so blatantly obvious. You know, but our press will not. Nobody in our press will criticize it.
One quote from, sorry.
Go on.
This is my last quote for the day. This is still from Michael Fry. He says, I don't agree with it. Hardly anybody believes the UK can stay as it is, yet nobody is able to say, largely because nobody asked till last week, on what other terms it is going to survive. Well,
I mean, to link this back to the Gove, or the slithy toad, as I like to refer to him. The British government has already hived off Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is in the single market. The rest of the UK is not. So it's started. The breakup has started. Now they can spin it. No, they can spin it any way they want. Northern Ireland will get, while it suits them, the same support that Scotland, England, and Wales will get from the government coffers in Westminster. It will have all the advantages. Eventually, all those advantages will put it on an equal footing with Southern Ireland, which is now a very rich country. Once it's there, and people start going, wait a minute, if they do away with that border down the Irish Sea, we're going to have to start paying tariffs. We're going to be out of pocket. It's going to be financially disadvantaged to them to come back into the UK fold. And it won't matter what unionists in Northern Ireland will say, because the jingling in their pockets will be all the proof that the people of Northern Ireland need to know that they don't want to be part of the Union.
I think you need to write that down and post it somewhere on social media.
Well,
I would say, I would throw in the fact that the Isle of Man, Jersey, Guernsey, they have a huge amount of independence. They have their own, huge amount of independence from London, from England. They're not in any hurry to to change much, are they?
well, they might be, depending on how leaving the European Union affects them. Nobody discusses them. You've got Gibraltar.
Well, Jersey, and certainly Jersey has never been in the European Union, I don't think, because that's why ever since I first went there, God, I imported.
Right enough. Neither, because they're offshore.
Yes, you had to go through customs to land in Jersey. I remember that the first time I went. I was shocked. And I imported second-hand cars from Jersey. That was back in the 70s.
But Gibraltar is, when was the last time you saw that mentioned in the papers?
Yeah, well.
And if Gibraltar gets another deal, part of that deal will be, at the very least, shared sovereignty between the UK and Spain. So
I don't know. I'm not an expert on Gib.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how it comes out. I haven't seen anything in the papers about Gibraltar for a long time, but we're pushing our time now.
Okay.
I think we'll call it a day now.
Time to go.
Thanks, Jimmy, even though you're not here anymore. Thank you, Stuart.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
I'm Norrie, and thanks for listening, folks. We'll catch up with you tomorrow, which is PMQs, and we'll have either the same result for Christmas lockdown or a different Christmas lockdown, depending on the outcome of tonight's meeting, I would think, to report. But we'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you for listening and watching. Cheers for now.